Keep marking your attendance, students. Good afternoon to all of you. 5, what we have done in the last session, so that because of this gap, you will not miss that continuity, right? So we'll just go through the slides of lecture 5 once and then come to lecture 6. Because all these are concepts which have some continuity. So if there is any gap, you should not forget the concept, right? So in the last class, we emphasized on confidence intervals and two-sided and one-sided bounds. Okay, we understood how to calculate the critical value Z based on the confidence interval, and if we take the confidence interval as 95% or 90%, then how we can calculate the critical value Z in order to calculate the interval within which a particular range of values fall. Say if we take a interval like, if we take a normal distribution like this, having taking the confidence interval as 95%, then we are claiming that 95% of the time the true the true error, the true error also falls within this range, same as the sample error, right? Only 5%, 2.5% of the time and 2.5% of the time, it may fall outside this range, outside this confidence intervals range. So what is this confidence interval? It is the interval, it is the area, it is the confidence level we have that our model is generalizable, that our sample error and the true error will be almost the same 95% of the time, right? That is why we are stating that it may fall in this confidence interval. Our confidence interval is 95%, okay? And 2.5% on left side, that is, it may take 2.5% of the time, it may take lesser values than sample error, means the true error may be far lesser than sample error, or it may be far higher than sample error, only 2.5% of the time. So this 2.5 plus 2.5 is the remaining 5% non-confidence, means we doesn't have confidence in the generalizability of our machine learning model, right? So 95% confidence interval says that our model is generalizable 95% of the time. The sample error and the true error will be the same 95% of the time. Only 5% of the time we are not sure about it, because it may give very less true error or very high true error in those cases. Okay, that is how we specify the confidence interval. If our model is not highly generalizable, if our model is not performing too good with the unseen data, then we reduce our confidence interval. We reduce our confidence interval to 85%, 80%, 60%, right? We have to see that our confidence interval should be very high with very critical applications. Say, where some disease prediction have to be made, or some diagnosis for which disease, which diagnosis is the best. Okay, in that case, if we have developed a machine learning model, in such cases, the confidence interval should be very high. It means the machine learning model, how good it is performing with the sample data, same way it has to perform with the unseen data also, right? That is called as less difference between true error and the sample error, right? So that gives us an unbiased estimate of the true error. Okay, so there is no difference between the true error and the sample error, means our machine learning model is highly generalizable, right? But in some cases where you may afford to take very less generalizability of the machine learning model, in that cases your confidence interval may be kept to lesser values like 60%, 70%, or 80%. So when the confidence interval is 80%, then these tails will have 10% and 10%, 20% shared between the tails. It says that 80% of the time the model is performing well with the unseen data. Only 20% of the time you are not sure about its performance. Okay, that is the use of confidence interval. The confidence interval states the goodness of your machine learning model, right? So we have seen that as the sample size increases, even a binomial distribution tend to follow a normal distribution. A normal distribution is a bell curve like this with mean as 0 and standard deviation as 1. Now, initially, when you take lesser samples, in that case, the distribution may be skewed. It may be in this way, or it may be in this way. It may be skewed, but as you go on increasing the number of data points in a sample, as the size of your sample increases, then the entire data tends to follow a normal distribution. Okay, this is another important property under statistics. And we also understood how the z-score value can be located based on the confidence interval. When you know what confidence interval you are, what confidence level you are trying to assign to your machine learning model or to your statistical test, in that case, what would be the critical value, the z value can be located by the z-score table. Now, when you have this z-score and when you have the confidence interval, you can calculate the exact interval within which that particular error of true error falls most of the time, right? That is emphasized by this confidence intervals. For this, we have seen an example. See, in this case, the confidence interval is 80%. When it is 80%, see the z-score value. The z-score value comes up to here, plus or minus 1.28. That determines the interval within which the range of values fall into. Here, the range of values we are interested here is the true error. The true error falls into this particular interval most of the time. How is that interval measured? By taking this z value given the confidence interval. So for 80% it is 1.28%. But see, in this case what happens? On the left hand side, we are not bothered about any true error that is far lesser than the sample error. It is okay. We are affording lesser true errors, but we are not ready to tolerate higher true errors. In that case, we are relaxing the boundary on this side. This tail also we are combining into the confidence interval, so that this entire range we are claiming that the true value falls into, and it should not fall into this range. If it means that much percent you have no confidence about the true error, it may fall outside this particular range. Okay, that is how you need to understand about confidence interval. So whenever you are relaxing either the lower bound like this, or you are relaxing the upper bound, based on that the level of significance will be half, means the confidence increases. When I say 95% confidence interval, then my level of significance is 5%. Means 5% of the time my model may not perform well. 95% of the time my model will perform well with unseen data, right? In that case, 5% is called as the level of significance. Now, that level of significance is the risk I am taking with respect to my model that it may not perform well. Okay, so whenever you are taking up some data science courses, they frequently use this word level of significance. You should not get confused. Level of significance is the risk you are ready to take with your model that it doesn't perform well. And 95% confidence interval tells about your confidence about the model, that it generalizes well with unseen data. Okay, did you get the concept now? Now, whenever you are relaxing the lower bound, then the upper bound is having 2.5%, say in this case, or if we are taking 80% confidence interval, we have relaxed on the lower bound, means the 10% on the lower bound is relaxed, making the confidence interval come up to 90% now. Now 90% of the time you are claiming that the true error falls in this range, and 10% of the time it may show some extreme values which are far away from the sample error. Okay, so what is happening here? When you're relaxing the upper bound or the lower bound, in that case you are increasing your confidence, you're increasing the confidence interval that your model will be highly generalizable up to, and the true error falls in this particular range, and you're not sure only about this simple range, say 10%. What you're doing here is you're increasing the confidence. You're increasing the confidence in stating the generalizability of your model. Okay, that is mentioned in these slides in terms of alpha. When you take two-sided test, then your alpha value will be lesser, and the confidence interval will be say 95%. If you are taking 5% as the level of significance. But when you relax either the lower bound or the upper bound, means that 2.5% is being added to this 95% confidence interval, making it as 97.5%. Okay, so whenever there is no lower bound or whenever there is no upper bound, then actually you are trying to increase the interval of your confidence. You are trying to increase the level of your confidence about the machine learning model. Right? So initially, if it is a one-sided test, we are taking it as, if it is a two-sided test, we are taking it as 5% being shared as 2.5% on lower bound and 2.5% on the upper bound. But when we are taking it as one-sided test, then we are removing this restriction on one side, say lower bound. In that case, the confidence interval increases to 97.5%, and only 2.5% of the time you are affording extreme values than the sample error. The true errors extreme values than the sample error, you are tolerant with it. But you are not bothered anything about the lesser values of the true error. You are just flexible about it. That is why you relax the bound on one side, making it as one-sided bound. It is not having bound on both the sides. It is having bound only on one side. In that case, we are saying it as a one-sided bound or a one-sided test. Or sometimes we call it as one-tailed test. On two sides, if you have the bounds, we call it as two-tailed. But if you have bound on one side, you call it as one-tailed or one-sided bound. Okay, all this we understood in the last class. Now let us start our 6th lecture. Okay, in today's class, we are going to see a general approach for deriving the confidence intervals. What is the approach we follow in order to derive the confidence intervals? Now we have seen how to derive confidence interval estimates for one particular case. What is that case? Estimating the true error for a discrete valued hypothesis H. This H is framed on sample, right? You're taking from a population, a smaller sample, and you have built a machine learning model on this smaller sample, which is a proof of your hypothesis H. Okay, now this hypothesis means the statement you have made holds good for this sample. Now, whether it holds good for the larger population, same thing I'm talking about in terms of machine learning model. I have built a machine learning model, that is a hypothesis, from the sample by giving it as training data. Now, I want to prove whether that machine learning model predicts well with the larger population also, with the unseen data also. Okay, so we have seen so far how to derive confidence interval estimates for one particular case, that is estimating the true error for a discrete valued hypothesis H based on a sample of n independently drawn instances. All these terms you should be very well aware of. Independently drawn instances means when you are drawing a sample from a larger population, that draw doesn't have any influence on the next draw we are making. Means one data point is completely independent of the other data point. Picking up one data point doesn't increase the chances of picking up another data point, right? So they are independently drawn. There is no effect on the draws made to pick the instances from the larger population to form a sample, right? Now in particular, we can see this as a problem of estimating the mean expected value of mean, that is the expected value of a population based on the mean of a randomly drawn sample of size n. So how we understood this problem? We understood this problem as estimating the mean value of a population based on the mean of a randomly drawn sample. We are trying to see that the mean of the sample, whether it is approximately equal to the mean of the population. When the mean of the sample is almost same as mean of the population, then we say this as a good representative sample of the population. Now the mean of sample is far lesser than the mean of the population. Then we say this sample is biased. Means there is some difference between the data points you considered in the sample and the data points in the larger population. Okay, so whenever you are trying to pick a sample from the larger population, it should be representative, and the mean of the sample should be almost equal to the mean of the larger population, right? That is how we started understanding the problem. Now the general process of deriving the confidence interval consists of these following steps. First step is identify the underlying population parameter P. We are taking the population parameter as P. Let it be weight of the students, or performance of the students, or literacy rate in a country, or the poverty rate in a country, or mortality rate between of the children, means death rate among the children below 5 years in India. All these can be considered as population parameter, the parameter we are interested to measure, right, by performing an experiment after drawing the sample, right? So identify the underlying population parameter P. What is our parameter P here? In our case, finding the true error, okay, whether it is same as the sample error or not, or whether there is difference between the sample error and the true error. That is the parameter of interest here. But the parameter of interest can be different in different context. Okay. Now, what is the recovery rate in India? Recovery rate may be a parameter. What is the literacy ratio in India? That may be a parameter. Like that, you may have different kinds of parameters you are interested to study. Now, what is the parameter we are interested to study here is the true error. Whether excuse me. Now we are interested to find out whether the true error is almost same as the sample error or not, right? So define, what is the next step now? Define the estimator Y. What is the estimator we already have? What is the measure we already have? Sample error. And what we are trying to estimate now? The true error. Okay. So the population parameter P we have taken here as the true error, and the estimator we have, that is Y. That is the sample error. That measure we already have. Okay. Sample error estimator means what? Mean of all the sample errors will give you the estimator of the sample error. That is estimator Y. We are taking Y to represent it. Now it is desirable to choose a minimum variance unbiased estimator. What do we mean by this? Listen carefully. It is desirable it is always desirable to choose a minimum variance unbiased estimator. Means the variance between the sample error and the true error should be minimum, or the bias between the sample error and the true error should be minimum. The difference between the sample error and the true error should be minimum, which says that your model is performing well with the unseen data also. Okay, so it is desirable to choose a minimum variance between sample error and true error, unbiased estimator. When we say that there is less difference between sample error and true error, then we say your estimator is unbiased. Your estimator is performing the sample error with the sample and with the larger population. Error, not sample error. Error with the sample and error with the larger population, both are almost the same. There is no difference between them. Then we call the sample error as unbiased estimator, because there is no difference between true error and sample error. I'm repeating this again and again, so that it should be implanted into your minds. Okay, so do not get bored if I'm repeating the points too many times, but it is required here. Okay, so it is desirable to choose a minimum variance unbiased estimator. Now determine the probability distribution dy. What is y? The estimator, that is the sample error. Now let us find the probability distribution of that sample error that governs the estimator y, that is the sample error, that governs the estimator sample error, including its mean and variance. Now, okay, you have sample error. Now, what is its distribution? How is it distributed across the samples? Whether it is following a particular distribution, like Poisson distribution or normal distribution, that we have to determine the probability distribution dy that governs the estimator y, including its mean and variance. Now determine the n% confidence interval by finding thresholds, lower bound and upper bound. Okay, so when we are determining the n% confidence interval by finding the lower interval L and the upper bound U, such that n% of the mass in the probability dy falls between L and U. This is what I explained again and again, right? So when you take this as the distribution and when you have this as the lower bound and this as the upper bound, now you are determining the confidence interval. In this case 95% we have taken by finding the thresholds L and U such that n% of the mass in the probability distribution, n% of the time dy, that is the distribution, falls between these limits L and U. Means 95% of the time our true error should fall in this particular range. Okay, that is how we are deriving the confidence interval. Now let us discuss a fundamental result from estimation theory called the central limit theorem. Important question, remember. Actually, the central limit theorem states that the most of the time the true error or any population parameter falls in a particular confidence intervals range. That's all. That is the central limit theorem. It is not very complex. Okay, so let me explain you about that in detail so that you will understand in this context how it can be seen. Now, one essential fact that simplifies attempts to derive confidence interval is the central limit theorem. So when we are deriving the confidence intervals, this central limit theorem will make our work easier in order to assume what should be the confidence interval, what should be the lower bound, upper bound, and whether any relaxation can be given on the lower bound or the upper bound. All these decisions will be made more easier if we know what exactly is this central limit theorem. Now consider again our general setting in which we observe the values of n independently drawn random variables, y1, y2, and so on, yn, up to yn. Okay, these are our sample data points. Okay, in this case, If you take coin tosses, it is the number of coin toss experiments that are done. If you take our data set, these are the number of data points. Okay, y1, y2, and so on up to yn that obey the same unknown underlying probability distribution. We are assuming that they obey the same unknown underlying probability distribution. We doesn't know from which distribution they are drawn, but all have to be drawn from the same distribution. Remember what I'm telling, understand what I'm telling. They are drawn from the same distribution, but the underlying distribution is not known. Right? You're not taking some extreme values from somewhere and putting it as a data point. Okay, they are from good enough distribution, similar kind of distribution, but we don't know what exactly is the distribution, right? So let mu denote the mean of the unknown distribution governing each of the yi, means the data points, the training example say, and let sigma denote the standard deviation. I think I have to place it here. Okay, and let sigma denote the standard deviation. Let mu denote the mean of the unknown distribution yi governing each of yi, and let sigma denote the standard deviation. Now, in an attempt to estimate the mean mu of the distribution governing the yi, we calculate the sample mean. Now, whenever you want to know the underlying distribution of the larger population, first you should know the distribution of your sample, right? So you have to calculate the sample's mean. How do you calculate the sample mean? Say you have in your sample numbers 2, 4, 9, 11. This is your sample. Now, how to calculate the sample mean? 2 plus 4 plus 9 plus 11 by 4. Okay, that is nothing but the average of the data points in the sample. So that is given as sigma because you are adding up the points from 1 to n, 1, 2, 3 up to 4, yi. What is yi? In this case it is 2, in this case it is 4, 9, 11. Adding all of them and dividing by n. Because n is a constant, it is not included within sigma. That is why it is brought out, to not get confused. Or you can simply write it as yi by n also. It doesn't matter. Okay. So it is the average taken. Sum up all the data points in a sample and take their average. That is the sample mean indicated as yn bar. Okay, that is the sample mean indicated as yn bar. Now the central limit theorem states that the probability distribution governing this sample mean approaches a normal distribution. Understand this carefully. Approaches, tends to go towards a normal distribution when as n tends to infinity, means as the size of the sample increases or as the number of data points in a sample increases, as it tends to infinity, then regardless of the distribution, regardless of the distribution that governs the underlying random variable yi, it tends to approach a normal distribution. Okay, so whatever is the underlying distribution, irrespective of that, it will follow a normal distribution. Then whenever it is following a normal distribution, you know that mu is equal to 0. Mean of a normal distribution is equal to 0 and the standard deviation is equal to 1. Okay, now let us see once again. The central limit theorem states that the probability distribution governing the sample mean, how would it be? In what shape it would be? It would approach a normal distribution as n tends to infinity, means as the sample size increases, as the number of data points in a sample increases, then the sample mean approaches a normal distribution irrespective of the underlying distribution of these random variables yi. Whatever is the distribution between these random variables, it tends to follow normal distribution once n starts increasing, once the sample size starts increasing. Okay. Furthermore, the mean of the distribution governing this yn bar approaches mu. Mu means the larger population's mean. The larger population's mean, mu. And the standard deviation approaches sigma by square root of n. And almost, this will almost be approximately be equal to 1. I'm saying approximately, okay? It is not exactly equal to 1, but it approximately may be equal to 1. Okay, so the mean of the distribution governing this yn bar, that is the sample mean, will slowly go towards mu, that is the larger population's mean. Okay, because when your sample is small, it may not be representative. The population is very large, your sample is very small, it may not be representative. But when you are making your sample larger and larger, it tends to represent it succeeds in representing the larger population exactly. In such case, the larger population mean and the sample's mean tends to become equal, and both of them may follow a normal distribution. Larger population mean always follows normal distribution. Now the sample also, because it is growing, it tends to follow normal distribution. Okay, with mu as the mean and sigma by square root of n as the standard deviation, which would approximately be equal to 1. Mu will be approximately equal to 0. Now, what is the central limit theorem? Official definition of this theorem. Consider a set of independent, identically distributed random variables. So whenever you are explaining about a person, you give its features, right? Good, tolerant, patient enough, and very compassionate, and successful, something like that, right? Adjectives. In the same way, when you're defining the random variables also, you have to tell how they are drawn. They are drawn independently and they are drawn from an identical distribution. Right, that is why you are giving, these terms are important. Okay, when you're writing the theorem, do not forget these keywords, they are important. Consider a set of independent, identically distributed random variables, means drawn from an identical distribution, y1, y2 and so on up to yn, governed by an arbitrary probability distribution with mean mu. What is the probability distribution underlying? What is the mean of that underlying probability distribution? Mu, and finite variance sigma square. Mean, standard deviation sigma. Because square root applied to variance will give you standard deviation. Okay, governed by arbitrary probability distribution with mean mu and standard deviation sigma and finite variance sigma square. Now define the sample mean. How do you define the sample mean? You know this formula, right? Add up all the values and take the average. That will give you the sample mean. Now, then as n tends to infinity, as the size of the sample increases, the distribution governing this means the difference between the sample and the true mean means population mean. The sample mean, the difference between the sample mean and the true mean divided by the standard deviation further divided by square root of the number of data points taken in the sample approaches a normal distribution with mean as 0 and standard deviation as 1. This is central limit theorem. How to tell it in one line is, as the sample size increases, this is your population, this is your sample. As the sample size increases, then this sample tends to follow a normal distribution with 0 mean and standard deviation 1. Got it, students? So the central limit theorem describes how the mean and variance of y bar can be used to determine the mean and variance of the individual yi, individual random variables yi. Now the central limit theorem implies that whenever we define an estimator, that is the mean of some sample, Mean of some sample is represented as sample error, right? So the central limit theorem implies that whenever we define an estimator, that is the sample mean, sample errors mean, the distribution governing this estimator can be approximated by a normal distribution for sufficiently large n. Underline this word. Whenever you are taking a distribution, it tends to follow a normal distribution only if your sample size is sufficiently large. Okay, so this sample error tends to follow this distribution. That is why we are able to take the confidence interval and claim that most of the time the true error may fall into a particular confidence interval, and very less amount of time it may fall outside that confidence interval. Okay, now a common rule of thumb is that we can use the normal approximation, this assumption that the probability distribution tends towards a normal distribution. That assumption can be made when the number of data points in a sample are greater than or equal to 30. This is general rule of thumb, means general assumption that we make. If the sample is having greater than or equal to 30 data points, in that case we can assume that the distribution, underlying distribution, may be a normal distribution, right? In the next class, we'll see how to calculate the difference in error of two hypotheses. Now quickly answer these two questions. What is the mean of a normal distribution? Students, what is the mean of a normal distribution? Mu is equal to how much? Whenever you have a normal distribution like this, mu is equal to how much? That is this point, sorry. This point, mu, is equal to how much? And standard deviation equal to how much? Can anybody answer? Mu is 0 or 1?
0, ma'am.
0. What is the value of standard deviation?
1.
1. It can at most deviate to up to 1. Okay. Any doubts in today's class? Because we have ample amount of time, I'm just doing it very slowly. Further, some 4 or 5 topics are there in this chapter, and I'm taking very small concept for each class and I'm explaining so that you'll understand very well, so that I can take sufficient time to elaborate on the concept. Do you have any doubts in today's class? Okay, then we'll meet in the next class. Bye.